A section. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a sigh of compressed air releasing him back into a world he only remembered in photographs and fever dreams. Staff Sergeant Elias Thorne stepped down onto the cracked asphalt of the Oakhaven bus station, the familiar scent of damp earth and diesel fumes a stark, gentle contrast to the 14 years of sand, cordite, and metallic heat that had been his atmosphere. The world here felt impossibly quiet, the silence so profound it was almost a noise in itself, a low hum beneath the chirp of a distant sparrow. He shifted the weight of the olive-drab duffel bag on his shoulder. It felt lighter than it should have, a hollowed-out version of the burdens he'd carried for so long. Inside were uniforms he'd never wear again and a few keepsakes that had survived the furnace. The real weight was something he carried inside, a dense, invisible pack of memories and lost time. A section he'd chosen not to call. 14 years was a chasm. A phone call felt too small to bridge it. He wanted to see it for himself, to stand on his own porch and let the reality of his return sink in through the soles of his boots. A surprise. A grand, cinematic reunion he'd played over and over in his head during long, silent nights in the belly of his tank, the engine's rumble a poor substitute for a heartbeat next to his own. He pictured his wife, Sarah, her face collapsing in disbelief, then joy. He pictured his daughter, Maya. She'd be 17 now. A young woman. He clutched the worn photo in his pocket, a 3-year-old with Sarah's eyes and a smile that could disarm a battalion. That was the face he was fighting for. That was the image that kept him alive when the world had tried its best to kill him. A section. The walk home was a patrol through a ghost city. The route was etched into his muscle memory, a map he could navigate blindfolded. Miller's Hardware still stood on the corner, its sign faded but resolute. The grand oak at the entrance to his neighborhood, the one he and Sarah had carved their initials into, was thicker now, the bark having swollen around the crude heart, almost swallowing it whole. He saw familiar houses, some with new coats of paint, others with different cars in the driveways. Life had continued its slow, inexorable march while he had been frozen in a state of suspended animation, a constant readiness for a violence that never truly ended. He felt like a specter haunting his own past, visible but not quite part of the world he was observing. A section. He turned onto Sycamore Lane. And there it was. Number 24. His house. A section. The first crack in his carefully constructed fantasy appeared as a tremor of wrongness. The lawn was overgrown, not with the charming neglect of a busy family, but with the stark, uniform weeds of abandonment. The flower beds Sarah had tended with religious fervor were barren, choked with thistle. A fine layer of grime coated the windows, rendering them opaque and lifeless. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. His tactical mind, the part of him that scanned for threats and anomalies, took over. He catalogued the details with a cold, detached efficiency that pushed the rising panic down. Mailbox overflowing. A faint crack in the porch railing that wasn't there before. A deep, unnerving silence where there should have been the murmur of life. A section. He walked up the 3 concrete steps, his boots making a hollow sound that seemed too loud. He reached for the doorknob, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He slid his old key, the one he'd kept on his dog tags for over a decade, into the lock. It met a solid, unyielding obstruction. The lock had been changed. A simple, practical act that felt like a bayonet to the gut. The house, his sanctuary, his objective, had fortified its perimeter against him. He stood there for a long moment, the useless key still in his hand, a relic from a life that no longer seemed to exist. A section. Forcing down the metallic taste of dread, he knocked. The sound was absorbed by the wood, swallowed by the silence within. He knocked again, harder this time, the knuckles of his right hand rapping out a sharp, insistent rhythm. He was a stranger at his own front door. A section. He heard a faint shuffle from inside. Then, the bolt slid back with a metallic click that echoed in the pit of his stomach. The door creaked open a few inches, and a face peered out. A young woman, 17 or so, with tired, suspicious eyes. Eyes he knew better than his own. Sarah's eyes. It was Maya. His daughter. But there was no flicker of recognition. No shock. Just the cautious, wary appraisal one gives a solicitor or a madman. A section, can I help you? She asked, her voice flat, devoid of warmth. A section, Elias's own voice was gone, caught somewhere in his throat. The words he'd rehearsed for years evaporated. He could only stare, trying to reconcile the toddler from the photograph with the guarded teenager in front of him. He saw Sarah's jawline, the same slight upturn of her nose. He was looking at his own history, and it was looking back at him like he was nothing. A section, Mom, Maya called over her shoulder, not taking her eyes off him. There's someone here. A section, footsteps approached from deeper within the house. And then Sarah was there, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She froze in the hallway, her face draining of all color until it was a waxy, translucent white. Her eyes widened, not in joy, but in sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked at him as if he were an apparition, a ghost summoned from a shallow grave. The dish towel slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. A section, Eli, she whispered, the name a fragile, broken thing. A section, his voice finally returned, rough and strained. Sarah, he managed a weak, trembling smile. I'm home. A section, but Sarah's gaze wasn't on him. It was darting between him and Maya, her panic escalating. Maya looked from her mother's horrified face back to the strange soldier on her porch. Her brow furrowed in confusion. A section, Mom, who is this guy? She asked, a note of irritation in her voice. Do we know him? A section, the question hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a question of someone who had forgotten. It was the question of someone who had never known. The carefully constructed world inside his head, the one that had sustained him through firefights and interrogations and the crushing loneliness of command, shattered into a million pieces. His surprise reunion had happened, but he was the only one surprised. He was the anomaly. He was the crisis. In that moment, standing on the porch of a house that was no longer his, looking at a daughter who did not know his name, Elias Thorne understood that the war had followed him home, and he had just walked into a new and devastating kind of ambush. A section, the silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Sarah finally moved, her actions jerky, robotic. Maya, go to your room. Now. A section, but who is he? Maya insisted, her gaze still fixed on Elias, a flicker of something, not recognition, but a deep, primal curiosity, dawning in her eyes. A section, now, Maya. Sarah's voice cracked, sharp and brittle. Maya flinched, gave Elias one last, searching look, and retreated down the dark hallway, the soft thud of her bedroom door closing like a gavel. A section, Sarah stepped onto the porch, pulling the front door almost closed behind her, creating a barrier between him and the life inside. She was thinner than he remembered, and lines of exhaustion were carved around her eyes and mouth. This was not the vibrant woman he'd left behind, this was a survivor, and he was the wreckage that had just washed ashore. A section, they told me you were dead, Eli, she said, her voice a raw whisper. They sent a letter. 2 officers came to the door. They gave me a flag, her hands trembled as she spoke. We had a funeral. I buried an empty casket. A section, Elias nodded slowly, his own throat tight. I know. I was a prisoner for 11 months after the ambush. By the time they found our unit, I was already gone. It took a long time to get back, the explanation felt hollow, a clinical report of a nightmare. It didn't begin to cover the chasm of experience. A section, but... Maya, he finally managed to say, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. She looked at me like, she's never seen me before. A section Sarah's face crumpled. A wave of guilt and shame so powerful it seemed to physically bow her washed over her features. She wouldn't meet his eyes. She stared at the cracked concrete of the porch. She was only 3, Eli. When they told me you were gone, how do you explain that to a 3-year-old? How do you tell a child that her father, her hero, was blown up in a desert halfway around the world and is never, ever coming back? A section she took a shuddering breath, the words spilling out in a torrent of long-suppressed pain. I couldn't put that on her. The finality of it. So I told her something else. Something I thought a child could understand. She finally looked up, her eyes pleading, swimming in tears. I told her you left us. I told her you packed a bag one day and walked away. It gave her something to be angry at, something to fight against instead of, just a hole. An absence. A section Elias felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The air thinned. He had survived IEDs, RPGs, and ambushes. He had endured starvation and interrogation. But this confession, delivered on the porch of his own home, was the most devastating ordinance he had ever faced. She hadn't just buried him, she had erased him. She had replaced the image of a soldier, a hero, a father, with that of a coward. A deserter. A section, you what? The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 14 years of sacrifice. A section, when they found you, a year later, when they called and told me you were alive, the lie was already there, Eli. It had taken root. It was her reality, Sarah choked out. She was already in therapy, dealing with abandonment issues. How could I turn around and say, oh, by the way, I lied? Your father didn't abandon you, he's just been a prisoner of war, presumed dead. Everything you felt for the last year is based on a lie I told to protect you? It would have broken her. It would have destroyed her trust in me, in everything. I was a coward. I know I was. I didn't know how to fix it. A section, he said nothing. He couldn't. There were no words. There was only a vast, roaring emptiness where his hope had been. He looked past her, at the closed door. Behind it was his daughter, a girl who had spent her entire life hating a man for abandoning her, a man who had spent that same life dreaming of returning to her. The ultimate friendly fire incident. A wound inflicted not by the enemy, but by the very person he was fighting to protect. He turned without another word and walked away, the duffel bag on his shoulder now feeling impossibly heavy, filled with the full, crushing weight of his ghosts. A section, the motel room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. The floral bedspread was thin and rough, the walls a depressing shade of beige. For Elias, it felt perversely familiar. The anonymity, the transient nature of the space, it was no different from a forward operating base, just with softer corners. He sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at the textured wallpaper, replaying Sarah's confession. Each word was a piece of shrapnel working its way deeper into him. His soldier's mind tried to process it tactically. Assess the damage. Identify the threat. Formulate a response. But the enemy wasn't a tangible force. It was a story. A 14-year-old lie that had become more real than the truth. His primary directive had always been to protect his family. But from this? How could he protect his daughter from the very shield her mother had built around her? A section, he felt a surge of pure, white-hot rage. Rage at Sarah for her weakness, for her devastating choice. Rage at the army for letting him be declared dead. Rage at the world for demanding such a price from him, only to steal the very thing he had paid for. His instinct, honed by years of direct action, was to confront, to breach, to reclaim. To storm back to that house, find his daughter, and force the truth into the light. To detonate the lie and deal with the fallout. It would be a battle, messy and brutal, but it was a fight he understood. A section, but then, an image of Maya's face surfaced in his mind. The guarded, weary look in her eyes. The face of a kid who had already fought a war of her own, on a battlefield of quiet hallways and schoolyards, against the ghost of a father who chose not to be there. Forcing his truth upon her now would be another violent act. It would make her a casualty all over again, caught in the crossfire between her mother's lie and his reality. He would be confirming her deepest fear, that the arrival of a parent brings only pain and destruction. He sank his head into his hands, the rage dissolving into a profound, gut-wrenching grief. He was trained to be a warrior, a commander of a 60-ton beast of steel. He knew how to destroy. He had no idea how to build. A section the next day, he found himself outside the stone walls of St. Jude's Catholic Church. He wasn't a religious man, not anymore, but he was looking for sanctuary, for counsel. Father Michael had been there when he was a boy, a steady presence in the community. If anyone had a map of the town's emotional terrain, it was him. A section the priest, older now, his hair a fine white crown, listened without interruption in the quiet of his study. He let Elias pour out the entire story, the hope and the horror, the anger and the helplessness. When Elias finally fell silent, his voice hoarse, Father Michael leaned forward, his hands steepled on his mahogany desk. A section, war has many casualties, Elias, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Some are left on the battlefield. Many, many more are created back home. Sarah made a choice born of incredible pain and fear. A wrong choice, yes. A deeply wounding one. But you cannot judge the actions of a person drowning while you stand on the shore. He paused, letting the words settle. The question is not how you can win this fight. There is no victory here. The question is, what is your mission now? Your old one is complete. You've come home. This is a new deployment. A section, a new deployment. The words resonated with a terrible clarity. His mission was no longer to fight for a past that was gone. It was to navigate the treacherous landscape of the present. His objective wasn't to reclaim his title as father. It was to perhaps, one day, earn the trust of the stranger who was his daughter. The choice became clear. It wasn't about fighting for his own justice. It was about protecting Maya from any more damage. The mission was no longer about taking ground. It was about demining it, carefully and with infinite patience. A section, he left the church with a sense of purpose, a quiet, somber resolve that replaced the turmoil in his soul. He went back to the motel, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled out his phone. He sent a simple, direct text to Sarah. Meet me at the town park. The one by the creek. Bring Maya. I won't fight. I just want to talk. It's her right to know who I am. A section, the park was a neutral ground, a stretch of green that belonged to no one and everyone. Elias sat on a wooden bench near the gentle burble of the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. It was the same park where he had pushed a squealing, laughing Maya on the swings, her small hands clutching the chains. He saw them approach from across the field, two figures moving slowly, hesitantly. Sarah looked terrified. Maya looked resentful, dragged along against her will. A section, they stopped a few feet away, maintaining a defensive distance. Elias didn't stand. He remained seated, making himself smaller, less of a threat. He looked directly at Maya. A section, hello, Maya, he began, his voice steady. My name is Elias Thorne. Your mother and I, we knew each other a very long time ago. He didn't look at Sarah, didn't give her away. He was taking ownership of the introduction. I don't want to cause any trouble. I just wanted you to hear something from me. A section, he didn't talk about her mother's lie. He didn't use words like abandon or desert. He told her his story. He spoke of a young soldier who loved a woman and their little girl more than anything in the world. He spoke of a deployment that went wrong, of a long, dark time when his only light was a faded photograph of a smiling toddler. He spoke of dreaming every single night of coming home, of pushing her on the swings in this very park, of teaching her how to ride a bike. He spoke not as an accuser, but as a man bearing witness to his own life, laying out the facts of his heart for her to inspect. A section, for 14 years, he finished, his voice thick with emotion, my only mission was to get back to you. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that you were never, not for 1 second, abandoned. You were remembered. You were loved. A section, Maya's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Confusion, anger, disbelief. She stared at him, then shot a betrayed, questioning look at her mother. Sarah stood silently, tears streaming down her face, offering no defense. She was letting the truth, however it landed, finally have its say. A section, Maya's eyes locked back on Elias. She saw the deep lines of pain on his face, the profound sorrow in his eyes. She saw the truth of his words written in the geography of his suffering. Her own anger, the anger that had been her constant companion for as long as she could remember, began to crumble, revealing the deep well of hurt beneath it. Her lower lip trembled. A section, you were a prisoner, she asked, the words barely a whisper. A section, Elias just nodded. Yes. A section, it was the key. The one word that unlocked everything. The dam of a lifetime of misunderstanding broke. A sob escaped her, a raw, wounded sound. She wasn't looking at a deadbeat dad or a stranger. She was looking at a ghost. A man who had suffered unimaginably, all while she was hating him. The narrative of her entire life had just been rewritten in the span of 5 minutes. She looked from his broken face to her mother's, and for the first time, she saw them not as a villain and a victim, but as 2 survivors of a catastrophe she was only just beginning to understand. She didn't run to him. She didn't rage at her mother. She just stood there, weeping for the father she never knew she had lost, and the years that had been stolen from them all. A section, 6 months later, Elias sat on the cold metal bleachers of the Oakhaven High School soccer field. He had his own small apartment now, a simple 2-room place above Miller's Hardware. It was sparse, but it was his. A base of operations. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of cut grass and the shouts of the girls on the field. He watched number 12, a blur of motion with a fierce determination in her eyes, chasing down the ball. Maya. A section, their relationship was a delicate, unmapped territory they were navigating with painstaking care. There were no grand declarations or tearful reunions. There was only the slow, quiet work of construction. It began with coffee every Saturday at a neutral diner, conversations halting and awkward, filled with the vast, unspoken space of 14 lost years. He learned that she loved cynical literature and hated the color yellow. She learned that he drank his coffee black and had a quiet, dry wit that only emerged when he felt safe. He never once spoke ill of her mother. He understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that Sarah had been a casualty, too, trapped by a decision made in the fog of grief. She and Elias were like 2 opposing commanders after a ceasefire, respectfully acknowledging the damage done and focusing only on the civilians caught between them. A section, on the field, Maya intercepted a pass, pivoted, and launched a powerful shot. The ball sailed through the air, a perfect arc that ended in the back of the net. The crowd erupted. Elias felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly buckled him. He didn't cheer. He just watched. A section, after the initial shock of her goal, after the high fives from her teammates, Maya did something she had never done before. She slowed her jog, turned her head, and scanned the bleachers. Her eyes found his. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the field. Then, she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. A flicker of a smile touched her lips before she turned back to the game. A section, Elias nodded back, a lump forming in his throat. It was not a victory parade. It was not a medal ceremony. It was better. It was a communication line, established across contested ground. It was a fragile truce, a single, hopeful flag planted in the middle of a long and desolate war zone. The old mission was over. The fight was done. His new one, the patient, quiet, lifelong mission of being present, of holding this hard-won ground, had just begun. And for the first time since stepping off that bus, Staff Sergeant Elias Thorne felt like he was finally, truly, home.